Sarah Martinez had always been the kind of person who loved attention. At 23, she worked as a barista at a small coffee shop near the naval base in San Diego. Every day, she served dozens of military personnel, from fresh recruits to seasoned veterans. She watched them with fascination, listening to their stories and observing their confident demeanor. The coffee shop was always buzzing with conversations about deployments, training exercises, and military life. Sarah found herself drawn into these discussions, initially as a curious listener, but somewhere along the way, listening wasn't enough anymore. She wanted to be part of their world, to command the same respect and admiration she saw in their eyes when they talked about their service. It started small. When customers would ask about her background, Sarah began dropping hints about having military connections. She would mention casually that her family had a strong military tradition. The lies felt harmless at first, just a way to connect with the people she served coffee to every day. But as weeks turned into months, Sarah's stories grew bolder and more elaborate. She began claiming that her older brother was a Marine, stationed overseas. Then she invented a father who had served in the army during the Gulf War. Each lie seemed to earn her more respect and attention from the military customers who frequented the shop. The turning point came on a busy Tuesday morning when Lieutenant Commander James Walsh entered the coffee shop. He was a distinguished-looking man in his 40s, with graying temples and the kind of presence that commanded attention. Sarah had seen him before but had never served him directly. As she prepared his usual black coffee, Lieutenant Commander Walsh struck up a conversation. He had noticed her military-themed jewelry and asked about her family's service. This was Sarah's moment to shine, and she seized it with both hands. "My mother actually served as a Navy SEAL," Sarah said confidently, her voice carrying across the small space. Several other customers turned to look, their expressions shifting to one of impressed surprise. Lieutenant Commander Walsh raised an eyebrow. "A SEAL? That's quite remarkable. Women weren't officially allowed in SEAL units until very recently, and even now, very few have made it through the program." Sarah felt a flutter of nervousness but pushed forward. "Oh yes. She was one of the pioneers. She always told me she had to work twice as hard as the men to prove herself. She served multiple tours in Afghanistan and Iraq." The coffee shop had grown noticeably quieter. Other military personnel were now openly listening to the conversation. Sarah felt the weight of their attention and found herself embellishing even further. "She earned a Bronze Star for her actions during a classified mission in Kandahar," Sarah continued, her confidence growing with each word. "She saved her entire unit when they were ambushed. She never talks about it much, though. You know how it is with special operations people." Lieutenant Commander Walsh nodded slowly, his expression unreadable. "Indeed. What was her name and unit designation?" "I might have crossed paths with her during my time in theater." Sarah's heart skipped a beat, but she had come too far to back down now. "Maria Santos. She went by her maiden name during service. Unit designation." Sarah paused, trying to recall details from movies and books she had read. "SEAL Team 6. ID. SEAL Team 6. SEAL Team 6. Lieutenant Commander Walsh repeated carefully. "And she served when?" From 2001 to 2010, Sarah replied, grateful that she had at least thought to give specific dates. "She was deployed 4 times during that period." The lieutenant commander's expression had shifted slightly, though Sarah couldn't quite read what the change meant. Around them, the other military customers continued to listen intently. Sarah felt proud of herself for capturing their attention and respect. "That's quite a distinguished service record," Lieutenant Commander Walsh said finally. "Your mother must be very proud of her achievements. Is she still in the area?" Sarah shook her head. "She moved to Colorado after she retired. She runs a security consulting firm now. Uses her military experience to help train corporate security teams." "Fascinating," Lieutenant Commander Walsh said, accepting his coffee. As he left, Sarah felt a surge of satisfaction. She had successfully impressed one of the most senior military officers who frequented the shop. Word would surely spread about her mother's heroic service, and Sarah would finally have the respect and admiration she craved. But what Sarah didn't know was that Lieutenant Commander Walsh had served as a liaison officer with various special operations units during his career. He knew the SEAL community well, and several things about Sarah's story didn't add up. Women had only been officially allowed to attempt SEAL training in 2016, and no woman had successfully completed the program by 2010. Moreover, the specific details Sarah had provided about operations and awards didn't match any records he was familiar with. As Lieutenant Commander Walsh walked back to the base, he found himself troubled by the encounter. False claims about military service, especially such prestigious and dangerous roles, were not just lies. They were an insult to every person who had actually earned the right to wear the uniform and the insignia Sarah's fictional mother supposedly wore. He decided to make some discreet inquiries. Within an hour, he had confirmed what he suspected. There was no record of any Maria Santos serving in any SEAL unit during the time frame Sarah had specified. In fact, there were no records of any women serving in combat roles with SEAL teams during that period. Lieutenant Commander Walsh faced a difficult decision. He could simply ignore the situation and never return to the coffee shop. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized that Sarah's lies were likely to continue and potentially spread. Other service members frequented that shop, and they deserved to know the truth. After careful consideration, he decided to reach out to some of his contacts in the SEAL community. If Sarah was going to make such bold claims about her family's service, particularly in front of other military personnel, then perhaps it was time for her to meet some real SEALs and see how her story held up under closer scrutiny. The next morning, Sarah arrived at work, feeling more confident than ever. Several customers from the previous day had already greeted her with new respect. Clearly having heard about her mother's distinguished service, she felt like she was finally part of the military community she had always admired from the outside. She had no idea that her web of lies was about to unravel in the most dramatic way possible. 3 days after her conversation with Lieutenant Commander Walsh, Sarah noticed an unusual increase in military personnel visiting the coffee shop. She assumed word had spread about her mother's heroic service and felt pleased that she was finally getting the recognition she deserved. What Sarah didn't realize was that Lieutenant Commander Walsh had been busy. After confirming that her story was fabricated, he had reached out to Master Chief Petty Officer Robert Tank Morrison, a 20-year SEAL veteran who now worked as an instructor at the Naval Special Warfare Command. Morrison had served multiple deployments and knew virtually everyone who had been through the SEAL program during the time frame Sarah had mentioned. "Sir, I can tell you with absolute certainty that no woman named Maria Santos ever served with any SEAL unit during those years," Morrison had told Lieutenant Commander Walsh over the phone. "In fact, we didn't have any women in combat roles with the teams until much more recently, and even then, none have completed the full program yet." Morrison was particularly irritated by Sarah's claims because he had lost several close friends during operations in Afghanistan and Iraq. The idea that someone would fabricate military service, especially such distinguished service, struck him as deeply disrespectful to those who had actually paid the ultimate price. "What do you want to do about it, sir?" Morrison had asked. Lieutenant Commander Walsh had thought carefully before responding. "I think it's time this young lady met some real SEALs. Maybe she can tell them more about her mother's distinguished service record." Morrison had chuckled grimly. "I think I know just the guys for the job." Meanwhile, Sarah continued her daily routine, blissfully unaware of the investigation taking place. She had even begun to expand her story, telling regular customers about her mother's post-military consulting work and her expertise in counter-terrorism operations. On Friday afternoon, Sarah was working the late shift when she noticed a group of men enter the coffee shop. There were 6 of them, all clearly military, but something about them was different from the usual customers. They moved with a particular precision and awareness that made Sarah take notice. The man leading the group was tall and broad-shouldered, with close-cropped hair and intense eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the shop in seconds. Behind him were 5 other men, each equally impressive and alert. They were dressed in civilian clothes, but everything about their bearing screamed elite military. "Good afternoon," the lead man said, as he approached the counter. His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. "I'm Master Chief Morrison. These are some of my colleagues. We heard you might be able to tell us about your mother's service with the SEAL teams." Sarah felt a jolt of excitement mixed with nervousness. These men were clearly serious military personnel, and they had come specifically to hear about her mother. This was exactly the kind of recognition she had been hoping for. "Oh, absolutely," Sarah said, trying to keep her voice steady. "My mother, Maria Santos, served with SEAL Team 6 from 2001 to 2010. She was one of the first women to break through those barriers." Master Chief Morrison exchanged a glance with one of his companions. "SEAL Team 6, you said? That's quite an achievement. Can you tell us more about her specific deployments?" Sarah felt increasingly confident as she launched into her story. "Well, she served 4 tours in Afghanistan and Iraq. Her most famous mission was in Kandahar, where she earned the Bronze Star. Her unit was ambushed, and she managed to coordinate their escape while providing covering fire. She took out several enemy combatants and called in air support that saved everyone." One of the other men stepped forward. He had a scar running down his left cheek and looked like he had seen serious combat. "That sounds like quite an operation. I served in Kandahar during that time frame. What year was this mission?" R. 2007, Sarah replied quickly. "It was a nighttime raid on a suspected terrorist safe house." The scarred man nodded slowly. "I see. And you said she was with SEAL Team 6 specifically?" "That's right," Sarah confirmed. "She always said they called her Ghost because she was so good at moving undetected." Master Chief Morrison leaned forward slightly. "Ghost. That's an interesting call sign. Tell me, did your mother ever mention any of her teammates? Someone with her level of service would have worked with dozens of operators over the years." Sarah felt a moment of panic but pushed through. "She didn't talk about it much. You know how classified that stuff is. But she did mention someone called Hammer, who was her squad leader for a while." The men exchanged looks that Sarah couldn't interpret. She assumed they were impressed by her detailed knowledge of military operations and terminology. "Where did your mother do her initial training?" another man asked. "Coronado," Sarah replied confidently. She always said the training was the hardest thing she'd ever done. The instructors tried to make her quit because she was a woman, but she persevered. "Jom. And what year did she complete Bud.'s training?" Master Chief Morrison asked. Sarah paused. She wasn't entirely sure what Bud.S stood for, but she had heard the term before. 2000. She was in the class that graduated just before 9/11. The questioning continued for several more minutes, with each man asking increasingly specific questions about military procedures, equipment, and operations. Sarah did her best to answer, drawing on everything she had learned from movies, books, and conversations she had overheard in the coffee shop. Finally, Master Chief Morrison stepped back and looked at his colleagues. "Thank you for sharing that information about your mother's service. It's quite a remarkable story. I'm very proud of her," Sarah said, feeling relieved that the questioning seemed to be over. "She's always been my hero." "I'm sure she has," Morrison replied. His tone was neutral, but there was something in his eyes that made Sarah feel uncomfortable for the first time during the encounter. As the men prepared to leave, Morrison turned back to Sarah. "You know, it's interesting that you mention your mother serving with SEAL Team 6. That unit has a very specific mission set and operates under extremely classified conditions. Most families don't know much about their loved one's service with that particular unit." "Well, my mother always believed in being honest with family," Sarah replied, though she was beginning to sense that something wasn't quite right about this conversation. "Honesty is certainly important," Morrison agreed, "especially when it comes to military service. There's nothing more important than honoring the truth of what people have sacrificed for their country." After the men left, Sarah felt a strange mixture of pride and unease. On one hand, She had just impressed a group of clearly elite military personnel with her knowledge of her mother's service. On the other hand, something about their questions and reactions had left her feeling unsettled. She tried to shake off the feeling and focus on her work, but she couldn't stop thinking about the intensity in Master Chief Morrison's eyes. There had been something almost predatory about the way he and his men had listened to her story, as if they were hunting for something specific. That evening, as Sarah closed up the coffee shop, she decided to call her actual mother in Colorado. Maria Martinez, Sarah had kept her father's surname, was a retired schoolteacher who had never served in the military. Sarah had been making excuses for months about why her mother couldn't visit, or why military personnel couldn't meet her. "Hi, Mom," Sarah said when her mother answered the phone. "Sarah, how lovely to hear from you. How's work going?" Sarah hesitated. "It's fine." "Mom, has anyone ever contacted you asking about military service?" "Military service?" "Honey, you know I was a teacher for 30 years. Why would anyone ask me about military service?" "No reason," Sarah said quickly. "I was just curious." After she hung up, Sarah tried to convince herself that everything was fine. The men who had visited were probably just impressed by her mother's story and wanted to hear more details. There was no reason to worry. But deep down, Sarah knew she had crossed a line from which there might be no return. She just didn't realize how dramatically her lies were about to catch up with her. Sarah arrived at work the following Monday morning with a knot in her stomach that she couldn't shake. Over the weekend, she had replayed her conversation with Master Chief Morrison and his team dozens of times, trying to convince herself that everything had gone well. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized that their questions had been far too specific and their reactions too measured. The morning rush was busier than usual, and Sarah threw herself into her work, hoping to distract herself from her growing anxiety. She served the regular customers with forced cheerfulness, but she couldn't stop glancing toward the door, half expecting to see Master Chief Morrison return. Around noon, during the usual lull between the morning rush and lunch crowd, Sarah heard the distinctive sound of heavy boots on the coffee shop's tile floor. She looked up from wiping down the counter and felt her blood run cold. 6 men in full military combat gear were entering the shop. They wore desert camouflage uniforms, tactical vests, and carried themselves with the unmistakable bearing of elite special operations forces. Leading them was Master Chief Morrison, now in full military dress, his face set in grim determination. The other customers in the shop immediately fell silent. Some quickly gathered their belongings and left, sensing that something serious was about to happen. Others remained, transfixed by the dramatic scene unfolding before them. "Sarah Martinez," Master Chief Morrison called out in a voice that carried across the entire shop. "We need to have another conversation about your mother's military service." Sarah's hands began to tremble as she set down the cloth she had been holding. The casual, friendly demeanor of the men from Friday was completely gone. This was clearly an official visit, and Sarah finally understood that she was in serious trouble. I'm working right now," Sarah managed to stammer. "This won't take long," Morrison replied. He gestured to his teammates, who spread out around the shop in a practiced formation that effectively blocked all exits without appearing overtly threatening to the remaining customers. One of the men Sarah recognized from Friday stepped forward. He was carrying a tablet computer and wore the expression of someone who had done this type of confrontation before. "Sarah, my name is Senior Chief Petty Officer Rodriguez. After our conversation on Friday, we conducted a thorough investigation into your claims about your mother's military service." His voice was calm, but carried an unmistakable authority. Sarah felt the room spinning slightly. "Investigation? That's correct," Rodriguez continued. "We checked all available records for any woman named Maria Santos, serving with SEAL Team 6 between 2001 and 2010. We also checked Maria Martinez, in case she had used a different surname during service." Master Chief Morrison picked up where Rodriguez left off. "We found no record of your mother serving in any capacity with naval special warfare. In fact, we found no record of her serving in any branch of the military." Sarah's face flushed red. She could feel the eyes of every remaining customer in the shop focused on her. There must be some mistake. Maybe the records are classified. Senior Chief Rodriguez held up his tablet. Sarah. Women were not officially allowed to serve in combat roles with SEAL units until 2016. The first woman didn't even attempt SEAL training until that year, and to date, no woman has successfully completed the full program. Your claim that your mother served with SEAL Team 6 from 2001 to 2010 is impossible. The silence in the coffee shop was deafening. Sarah felt as if the walls were closing in around her. She had been so focused on impressing people and gaining their respect that she had never considered the possibility that real military personnel would fact-check her stories. Furthermore, Morrison continued, his voice growing harder. The Bronze Star citation you described for actions in Kandahar doesn't match any operations that took place during the time frame you specified. We have people in this room who served in Kandahar during 2007, and none of them have any knowledge of the mission you described. One of the other team members, a man with sergeant's stripes, stepped forward. I was in Kandahar in 2007 with the 75th Ranger Regiment. We worked closely with SEAL units during that deployment. No operation matching your description ever took place. Sarah looked desperately around the shop, hoping for some escape from the situation. But the SEALs had positioned themselves strategically. There was nowhere to run. And even if there had been, she knew that running would only make things worse. Sarah, Master Chief Morrison said, his voice taking on a slightly gentler tone. Do you understand the seriousness of what you've been doing? Sarah's voice came out as barely more than a whisper. I just wanted people to respect me. Respect? Senior Chief Rodriguez stepped closer. You wanted respect by lying about military service? Do you have any idea what the people you've been lying about actually went through? Rodriguez gestured to his teammates. Every person in this room has served multiple combat deployments. We've lost friends in Afghanistan and Iraq. We've seen brothers and sisters come home, broken in body and spirit. And you thought you could earn respect by pretending your family was part of that sacrifice? Tears began flowing down Sarah's cheeks. The weight of what she had done was finally hitting her with full force. I'm sorry. I never meant to disrespect anyone. But that's exactly what you did, Morrison said firmly. Every lie you told was a slap in the face to every person who actually earned the right to wear the uniform. Every fabricated story was an insult to the families who have actually lost loved ones in service to their country. The sergeant who had served in Kandahar spoke up. There are people in this community who have given everything for their country. Gold Star families who have lost sons and daughters. Veterans who struggle every day with the physical and psychological wounds they received in combat. And you thought you could just make up stories to be part of that community? Sarah was sobbing now, unable to speak. The full enormity of her deception was crushing down on her like a physical weight. Senior Chief Rodriguez consulted his tablet again. Sarah, what you've been doing is called stolen valor. In many cases, it's not just morally wrong, it's illegal. Falsely claiming military service, especially distinguished service like you've described, can result in federal charges. Master Chief Morrison held up his hand. However, we're not here to arrest you. We're here to give you an opportunity to make this right. Sarah looked up through her tears, grasping at any hope of redemption. You're going to call your employer and explain that you need to leave work immediately due to a family emergency, Morrison continued. Then you're coming with us to the naval base, where you're going to personally apologize to Lieutenant Commander Walsh and any other service members who heard your lies. Rodriguez added, You're also going to write a formal statement acknowledging that everything you said about your mother's military service was false. That statement will be kept on file to ensure this never happens again. And after that, Morrison said, his voice taking on a tone of finality, you're going to find a new job somewhere far away from this military community. You've shown that you can't be trusted around service members and their families. Sarah nodded weakly, understanding that she had no choice but to comply. The respect and admiration she had craved had been completely destroyed, replaced by shame and humiliation that would follow her for years to come. As the SEALs escorted her from the coffee shop, Sarah caught sight of her reflection in the window. The person looking back at her was no longer the confident young woman who had thought she could impress military personnel with fabricated stories. Instead, she saw someone who had learned the hardest possible lesson about the difference between earning respect and stealing it. The remaining customers watched in stunned silence as the group left the shop. Word of what had happened spread quickly through the military community, serving as a powerful reminder that stolen valor would not be tolerated and that the truth would always come to light. Sarah's lies had been exposed in the most dramatic way possible. But more importantly, the honor and integrity of those who had actually served had been defended by the very people who understood its true value.